And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We got some big talking points for this week's MLS news, starting first with rumors that are floating around, actually now confirmed, that the Premier League has voted to implement a spending cap to their league structure. While it's unlikely that it might be passed due to other various hurdles, it's quite clear that Europe wants to be MLS so very bad. And if it came to effect, we should probably see how it would impact MLS. So we're going to talk about that. And then late on Thursday during the NFL draft, Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett came out to say that the city was pursuing an MLS team in the near future, directly after reportedly backing out of the deal for the new stadium USL side Indy 11 was trying to build. We're going to dive into the details to figure out really what happened for this all to go down. Did MLS manufacture a deal to destroy stadium hopes? That a team was openly adamant of joining the league in the first place? Is the mayor going rogue? All of that and more on this week's MLS news. Connor, how you doing, buddy? My hat's cooler than yours, for those that
I
don't.
was doing well until I saw that Sevy lost the no-hitter in the eighth.
Oh, dude, and the fact that he's not going to get a win out of it either.
That's so Mets fashion.
How criminal is that?
We're so back.
I just texted my dad too because I was at an award ceremony at school, and I was kind of getting updates on my phone. It was going on, and you know, no hitter through five, no hitter through hit, no hitter through seven. Drive home, no hitter broken up by Dansby Swanson, and then I go back and look at my phone after I like get ready for this, and it's 1-1. Severino's lost the chance to win a game. How
Yeah,
criminal is that?
he's getting the DeGrom treatment.
Listen,
Some
he
things
can
never change.
pitch like Degrom. That's one thing. The Degrom treatment should only be reserved for those who pitch like him consistently.
That's fair. That's fair.
All
We'll see
right.
what
Well,
happens.
there's your nugget of New York Mets content for the pod. I do want to kind of just jump right into this quickly. So let's go through Scarf of the week because we got a lot to talk about here.
Yeah. Well, there's very few times that we talk about the Premier League on the episode, so I'm taking my opportunity here to bring out my Chelsea scarf, my one and only Premier League scarf.
Yeah, well, I kind of went down the same line. We're going to talk a lot about Chelsea, by the way, in this next series here. But um, I've got the greatest team in the Premier League, Everton. You can try and knock us out, but we will never be moved. Up the effing Hawthies. And also the cool bucket hat I got from the Red Bull game on Saturday. It will be my new piece of headwear for at least the next 4 episodes. So deal
Oh,
with
big yikes.
it. Not a big bucket hat guy, but I did have to break it out since we got it at the stadium. So good game, Red Bull Vancouver. Really good to watch for the first time in a long time. Decent tactical play with this Red Bull side. I was talking to our friends at AFTN who helped us do the Vancouver preview, and that's kind of what we're talking about. Is the first time I'm going to a Red Bull game where both teams are going to be tactically sound enough to watch a game with that in mind. Where in the last 4 years, Red Bull were just win it and kick it. This one was actually a tactical battle, and they lined up pretty well. So
That's too much Red Bull for this episode. We're not talking about Red Bull today.
surely not. I could get so much more in if you'd
No,
like.
no, 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 no. Move it
Um,
along.
like I said, you're just mad because you had really tried to get your tennis involved, and I haven't acknowledged it yet. You want to talk tennis so bad with that hat.
Listen, we could sit here and talk tennis all day, but
No, we can't
I
because
won't
I've
I
got
won't do that to the fans, unlike you who will just selfishly talk about Red Bull even though they don't care.
I've got probably the working knowledge of tennis that an 8-year-old has. So
Yeah, you
that
probably
wouldn't
only
be a
know
very
players
long
that don't even play
conversation.
anymore.
Another thing that probably won't be a super long conversation, but one that's kind of fun to surmise this spending cap and how it affects MLS if it were to go in place. So this spending cap has just been approved as of the day of recording, or at least voted on in majority. I think only 3 teams went against it. So a hard spending cap in the Premier League, limiting the highest spending team to 5 times what the lowest earners will get from broadcast and commercial deals. So to be, frank about it, it still needs to be voted on by the General Council, as well as being approved by the PFA, which is the Players Association overseas, which is going to be the largest hurdle. They've already knocked down a salary cap in the lower leagues, and they are likely going to push back hard on this too. However, it does mean that if it was put in, if hypothetically it went in place this season, a hard spending cap of $518 million would have been instituted in the Premier League this year. That is a really big number. And it was only best did by one team who still is awaiting their points deduction, and that's Chelsea. They were the only ones who went over this cap, which is not shocking in the slightest. Which is funny because you've got Everton, who are like net positive for the last 3 years, being taken shot after shot, and then here's Chelsea burning money because they're bored and sitting in 12th, and they're just like, "Yeah, no, you're good. Don't worry about it."
Some of us are just better at it than others. So, I mean, don't get
That's
caught. I don't know. I don't know what to
don't
tell
get
you.
well. That's exactly what it comes into, right? It's not so much what you do; it's how many times you do it and who catches you. So to clarify, sorry, as we go off on our anti-Chelsea agenda here, squad costs are what are going to be kept at a minimum, and that is wage bill, transfer fees amortized, and agent payments, which is why Chelsea is through the roof because I think they paid like the majority of that 539 to their agents. So again, we'll skip through all that. Chelsea, I had like a page and a half of anti-Chelsea agenda, but I'll skip that.
What
Um,
else is new?
this is that something that is being spoken about as a way for other leagues to catch up to the Premier League in terms of spending and squad value and competitiveness. And that includes, in my opinion, the likes of MLS. But I wanted to kind of throw it to you first and get your thoughts on it.
I think that it's not. So this is just kind of a prediction. Obviously, I can't see into the future, so I don't know 100% sure how this is going to pan out. But my guess is that I think it is going to have. I don't think it, at least in the short term, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact on the league. I think you're still going to see your Man Cities, Arsenals, Liverpools at the top of the table. And I don't think that's going to change much. I do think it's going to affect them in Europe, which doesn't bode well for them considering how poorly they did this year in Europe. But I do think that it could give an advantage to the larger teams in Germany or in Italy or in Spain, who I think some of the leagues have some financial restrictions, but I'm thinking this will restrict the top teams from just being able to stockpile constant players, like just being able to have endless depth on their team and compete in 70 games in a season. I think with a salary cap now, you're starting to cut it back a little bit. And I know there's different registration rules for different competitions. And I don't know how that's going to factor into the salary cap, but I still think that it could have an impact on depth, which I think will hurt the English teams in European competitions. But I think across the league, I think you're still going to see the top teams at the top, unless there was a much harsher salary cap in place, which obviously they weren't going to do because that would be like you can't be at the level that the Premier League is at and make that drastic of a change. Like it goes by the same saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. They're at the top of the game. There's nothing for them to really change in that regard, unless you're just concerned that Man City keeps winning the title every single year.
Which we all should be. But anyways,
Yeah.
um, I agree with you. I think initially this isn't super impactful, right? Firstly, because I think it's going to be shot down before it even gets passed. Like, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to dive into like if this idea of anti-competitiveness is going to be the main driving. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what the laws are. I don't know how that works. I'm not going to try and theorize of it because that's just silly. But if we were to play hypothetical, right? Let's say hypothetically it does pass and we get involved. Only 3 of the 20 teams this year have come within even $100 million of that limit. $100 million. Not even the biggest spenders in the world, who are allegedly $17 million under this hypothetical spending cap, which I don't buy for a second, by the way. I don't believe Man City is not paying their team at least 518 mil. But anyways, with the transfer fees and all that. But regardless, I think the only thing that this does is it maybe, like you mentioned, um, the stockpiling of the 400, Chelsea's loan army of 400 kids that were going out on loan to all these different places. I think you start seeing them kind of phase out and go to other teams and maybe increase their value, especially some of the lower levels. And that includes MLS as well. Some of them who maybe don't want to go and be, playing if they can't, if they're not picked up by, I'll use hypothetically, right, the bottom half right now. If they're not picked up, let's say Nottingham Forest survives, right? If they don't get picked up by Nottingham and nobody above them wants them, instead of going to a team that just got promoted, maybe they're looking elsewhere. And with MLS's new rules, maybe they're able to pick some of those younger players who are still developing and looking to make moves. Maybe that's somebody that they can pick up. But this doesn't instantly force anyone except Chelsea and maybe Man City to start shedding wages before it goes into effect, right? Like I'm looking at the thing here. Aston Villa, who's on 250 mil in this squad cost, estimated, of course, is not looking at this spending cap that's double what they've already spent and being like, oh, we got to worry about it. And, you know, now we need to think about, oh, we can't go in and just buy Mbappe because that was never going to be the case anyway, right? They've got plans.
Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't rule it out.
Well, they've got plans to, they've got their transfer plans and how they want to do things like that. And my guess is it never ever crossed 500 mil because of this financial fair play that's been going on, where you're only allowed to lose 100 mil over 3 years anyway, give or take, whatever those numbers are. They if they were to go spend 500 mil, or their plan was to go spend 500 mil, that would put them in violation. So nobody was planning to spend that much anyway. Now, does this actually, now that I think about it, does it flip the other way and say, okay, well, now we're not even going to worry about how much you spend in a year as long as your spending's under this limit? So now do you see somebody like Fulham, who's at 155 mil, just go drop 400 mil on players, 300 mil on players? I doubt it. I don't think that's going to happen.
Do they
But
even
that
have the
might
money
be,
to do that?
well, that's the thing, right? Very few people have the owners who can even do that.
Hmm.
So all in all, right, big picture, I don't think instantly this is a huge needle mover, whether it goes into effect or.
Yeah, but that's what they needed to do. Like it's the same situation that we talk about with MLS rules and salary cap rules and all that. Like you're not just going to completely 180 all of the rules all of a sudden. Like
Right.
that would just be too harsh of a change. It would just be pure chaos, and you would have, at least in my opinion, I think you'd have a lot of issues. I think it's the same thing here for the Premier League. If you put in place a really harsh salary cap, I think you're going to put teams in a lot of trouble, and it's going to be hard for them to adjust in such like a short period of time. And I think you're going to see the quality then drop drastically in the league, which is not what you want to do if you're in charge of the Premier League, because you're at the top. Like people can of course like their respective leagues a lot more, but like in terms of revenue and in terms of marketability, the Premier League is the top dog, and it's not even close. They are the top league across the world. So it was, I think, the only move that they could make if they wanted to go down the salary cap route. And it's a move that I'm glad that they're doing, because I think we are heading down the road of seeing the same two or three teams being competitive at the top of the table every single year. And so hopefully, if they can start implementing more and more into the salary cap, you can maybe see a new team win every once in a while, or a new team be competitive at the top, kind of like how MLS has. Like when was the last time you've seen a team win back to back? Like I don't know off the top of my head, but it could be like DC United when like the league was first started and there were 8 teams in the league. But
Houston,
Houston, okay, so
LA.
that was what, 10-ish years ago? 10 plus? No, over
Houston
10
was
easily.
Houston was '07, then '08.
Yeah, so it's been almost 20 years at this point since the last time anybody in MLS has repeated as champion. Meanwhile, we are potentially about to see Man City win their fourth straight. So salary caps do
LA,
have their benefit, huh?
sorry, LA 2011, 2012.
Okay, yeah, it's still like 15 years pretty much. It just doesn't happen much in MLS, and that's a product of their harsh salary cap and being able to have teams bounce back quickly and not be stuck at the bottom while your Inter Miami's and LA Galaxies go drop loads of money to bring in superstars.
Yeah, and again, to bring this kind of full circle, I think one of the outside dreams, if you're an MLS executive watching this go down, is that if it's passed and it does actually end up restricting the spending of these top clubs, that they get so frustrated that they actually break away from the Super League, or to form the Super League that's being rumored, right? If these top five clubs and Chelsea, who's well out of the top five, trash, if they
Uncalled
all
for.
if they all start to leave because they can't spend what they want to make their teams, play fantasy Premier League basically, and they start to get frustrated with things like that, they may jump. And because they may not be there, the lower Prem teams, this has been theorized, like the money that those six-ish clubs bring in that gets funneled to the rest of the team or the rest of the leagues and even the lower leagues, it all goes away, which means the Prem loses its ability to start pulling, big name stars. It falls in popularity. And now these clubs are either looking to go to the Super League, which is going to have a cap on the amount of players. I'm assuming a cap on the amount of players who you can get. But then there are other players who are going to look for places to play. So then are you going to play in a Premier League that's lost massive popularity? Are you going to play in a Spain, Germany, whatever, that's really a 1 to 3 team league? Or are you going to go maybe over to MLS where you're going to get a good paycheck? You're going to be able to play as one of the best players in the league. The quality is going to increase in that sense anyway. And you're going to be able to market yourself ridiculous, right? Look at. I mean, I saw a comparison like Messi and Ronaldo moved roughly the same amount of time to their respective new clubs. Who has made the better end of the deal? And it's like everybody has a Messi Inter Miami jersey. I've seen very few, if any, Ronaldo is he at Hilal?
Nasser.
Al Nasser. Again, see, and that's my point, right? Like I couldn't tell you even what team he was on. Now, again, maybe that's
That's
because
a
I'm
little biased.
wild.
You
Maybe
live in
because
the
I'm
US.
maybe because I'm there, but people always said that it was going to be easier for Ronaldo to do that because he was going to go to Saudi and he had all this government, but he didn't, right? Again, it's a 15-year super dream society utopian world, right? Where um, the Super League is the downfall of the European dominance and players get more spread out and whatever. Does it actually happen? I doubt it. Again, this is all hypothetical, like dream world stuff. Because I think it gets shot down. You know, I think it gets past the council meeting. I think everybody in the council meeting is there, but I think the PFA is gonna knock it down, and then it's gonna get in the same vein of 115 charges FC. It's just gonna get stuck in the court system for 900 years, and it's never actually gonna do anything. And it is what it is. But like I said, this might be something that if it does get passed, starts pushing teams away and changes the face of football forever. And MLS could be benefactors of that, I
Me personally, just as a fan of the sport, I'd rather not see the Premier League go down just to potentially have MLS get boosted up. If I want MLS to be the best, I want them to do it the way they've been doing it and continue to grow through the means of investing in youth in the country and building reputation like that and bringing in the occasional big star like Messi. I'd rather do it like that if we're gonna get to the top than have like other teams drop below us, if you know what I mean. Like I want to climb to the top as opposed to just being at where we're at and people drop below us. So,
I think
but I mean, but also besides that, I mean, just as a fan of the sport, like the Premier League is very exciting to watch, even if Man City has won like 6 or 7 of the last 7 or 8 titles. Like it's still very exciting to watch. Like it has really good players. It's exciting soccer to watch. Really great coaches. So it's competitive, even if, like I said, City's winning a lot. It's super close usually towards the end. So I as a fan of the sport, I would rather not see them. The big teams leave for Super League and the rest of the Premier League kind of falls off. I'd rather see it continue to be successful, but with hopefully a little bit more parity in terms of who's winning titles.
maybe, like I said, I think first off, I think it's going to be a dual movement, right? I don't think MLS is going to stay here and then everybody's going to drop and this is going to be the level. I think it's going to go something like this, where we're going to see an increase in our level and maybe a decrease overseas. Now, that being said, right, if we're going to still live in this fantasy, world, this utopian dream world, the people who are, and we'll use the term lightly, Euro snobs who are just like, oh, I'm never going to watch MLS because it's not good enough. This Super League comes in, Premier League may drop off, but the Super League is just going to be their replacement. It's not going to replace with MLS. Like that'd be silly to dream. So I'm again, this is all kind of hypothetical stuff that I don't think any of it matters I don't think MLS is super affected by it in the same way that I don't think MLS was super affected by like Saudi spending, right? Like I just think that it's as much as we're interconnected with the European leagues buying our players and us taking some of theirs. When it comes to fan engagement, for the most part, Iron Curtain, right? We got ours over here, they've got theirs over there, and we're watching a lot over there, but they're not watching a lot over here. And even if we do see this change and this shift, I don't think that dynamic changes much, just because of history and culture, and that's like we've talked about that a lot, where money and massive spending or massive change over a short period of time doesn't change the culture or the way that things are done. You need time and effort and things like that. Again, I just don't think that happens in at least the next 2 decades. So this is all dreamer world.
Yeah, one day we can hope for MLS to be top, but it will take a lot of work and a lot of time.
Not in my lifetime, unless they
Yeah, probably not.
really blow it up and
Which maybe they could do in a couple decades, but probably not anything short term.
no, like I said, this we'll see. Again, something to keep an eye on. I don't think it really happens at all, if ever. But it is a dream world scenario. But if we're going to speak of things that are never likely to happen, Indy to MLS, we need to talk about this Indianapolis mayor who comes out and is like, "Oh, I met with MLS and I'm going to bring a franchise to the city of Indianapolis." Like out of nowhere. Like there was no rumors that this was going to happen. Like you've heard the rumors of Las Vegas and Phoenix and even San Diego that's now, we're in the works. Indy was so quiet. And then this guy comes out, he's like, "Oh, look at what I'm going to do." So to add some context, during the NFL draft, it came out that Indianapolis Mayor Hodgset is, I believe it's pronounced. He comes out and he makes an announcement. The city is officially pursuing an MLS club after meeting with Don Garber at the offices in New York. This directly followed, like a couple hours later, the announcement that the mayor walked away from the Indy 11 Stadium Park project, which jeopardized the $1.5 billion stadium deal in place that was in place for this USL club. Now, this, of course, as you would expect, sparked the conversation on Twitter that Garber intentionally called this meeting to sabotage the stadium deal to get a deal of his own, and he's actively trying to kill USL. And there's a lot of detail that needs to be brought to light to dive into this. But first things first, it was said that in the same tweet, the other cities that were brought into the idea of expansion for MLS was Tampa Bay and Detroit, which is home to two other relatively popular USL teams, as well as being on the short list with places like Las Vegas and Phoenix, who have USL teams. So I don't think it's very crazy to go out on a limb and say Garber is now making it very clear his target is cities with USL teams. San Diego, I thought at the time was a one off, but it's pretty clear what the tactic is. I think he's making it very, very understood that, hey, we are going to try to start expanding. We're looking for places that already have soccer following. We are looking to not have to start from scratch, basically. And best place to do that for, in his mind, is the USL cities. So I want to kind of get your thoughts on it. I know we've had that conversation before where you're not quite buying that, but maybe your thoughts have changed.
I guess my thought, and I want this to be a genuine question, but if you're in Garber's shoes and you're looking to expand, because the league has continuously been looking to expand and grow and add more teams to its league, what cities are you looking at that don't either have an MLS team in it already or have a USL team in it that you can look to expand in? Because I'm pulling up a map right now of like where all the USL teams are, and it's hard to find major cities that USL is not in that MLS could expand to without kind of having like walking into this situation of MLS is coming into the territory of USL. Like the league is going to continue to want to expand. We've seen that it's expanded a ton over the last 10 years. There've been so many new clubs that have been joining. And I mean, you mentioned a few of the cities already. Like we talked about San Diego, Detroit. I forget one of the other ones that you had mentioned. Tampa. I can't remember. Did you mention
Yep, Tampa
Tampa?
Bay's on there.
Like those are big cities. Like that's where a lot of other major sports teams are set up already. So, I mean, it makes sense that those are areas that MLS is looking in. And I'm having a hard time finding other major cities that MLS could move into that doesn't have some USL team there already. I don't know if you have any that you can think of off the top of your head, but I mean, I'm looking at the map right now and maybe I can't tell if this is a team or if it's just a logo, but maybe like New Orleans. That's like actually it looks like that might be a team. I'm not 100% sure,
Yeah,
but
they've got one coming, I believe, in 2025.
oh, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, so they are doing their own round of expansion and almost trying to get there first. Feels like it's a race, right? Now, the this information that I found on it was relatively interesting. So first and foremost, I think it needs to be understood, and some people get it, and some people think it shouldn't be this way, and it probably shouldn't, but it's where we're at, so we address it as it is. These are two businesses going up against each other. It's not the way it should be, but in 1996, when they were launching MLS, and then later on with USL kind of was floating around. I think they started in '86, if my memory serves correctly. They didn't merge to make one big thing and use the money from MLS to prop up these teams. They just started a brand new. So because of that, you are fighting for land, you are fighting for attention, you are fighting for stadium deals, you are fighting for all of it. It is terrible for the growth of the game generally until it stops, right? So his idea to expand is not wrong, right? Go to the places where people are. However, the execution, as we've said multiple times, is really, really poor. So I go back to this idea, and we've talked about it a little bit about what is MLS's future goal. We've seen side conversations off of this original idea that MLS is starting to sell MLS Next Pro investors on first dibs to a future MLS D2 league. And we've talked about that already. This MLS is looking to make its own pyramid and finish it up top to bottom and do its own thing. Pro rel in between it, maybe, or parachute payments. The idea is vague, but that seems where they're going to go. But in the comments of this idea were two relatively well-known accounts who basically said, I was told that MLS tried to buy USL as well. And at the time, NASL also tried to buy USL. And USL said, no deal. We want to do our own thing, which is fine. It is their right to do so. Now you're fighting. Right now it is like when Best Buy comes in for a circuit city. It's terrible. It is not good for the growth of the game. It is not good for the image of whatever league is trying to, usually the bigger league, right? MLS, whatever league is trying to squash out the lower leagues, but it's American business. So from that state, how do we move forward from there to do that? You can try and buy up the teams or encourage the teams to apply for your league, which is what was happening in Indy, to my understanding. We'll get into that in a little bit. But it's also something that may lead to, and this is where we hope it would go, a merger, right? You've seen it in NFL and AFL back in the 70s. You've seen it with the NBA and the ABA in the 70s. When a bigger league eventually comes in and tries to, with the money, with the following, with the power that generally comes with being in a first division side working with lower division sides, it usually ends up where they merge together, they absorb the teams, and they continue on under the bigger name with the bigger umbrella. USL does not want to do that, but I do think down the road, that's where this leads. I don't think it's going to be USL D1 versus MLS D1, and they're going to be fighting it out for the next 50 years. I don't think that's where this goes, because even if USL gets D1 status, the following and the, I guess, notoriety, for lack of a better term, isn't quite there yet. So they're still climbing up a hill, for lack of a better term. And I'll leave it there for your thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's not uncommon for things like this to happen in American sports. I mean, you look back at, and I don't know my NBA history super well, but I do know that at some point in time there were two different leagues, somewhat early into their existences, and they combined, I believe, and that ultimately ended up making the current day NBA. So if that is a route that MLS and USL takes, it's not something that's like unheard of for them to combine. And in terms of MLS expanding without encroaching into USL territory, that's probably the only way you'd be able to do that if you were to try to satisfy the USL fans in terms of like not kind of going into their territory and trying to, make MLS teams to take away from the crowd that USL has built up in those cities. But otherwise, I just don't see a lot of ways in which MLS could expand and not overlap. Like I think there's just going to be overlap. And I think the ultimate goal, and maybe this is me being a little bit too optimistic, would be for there to eventually be some kind of promotion relegation in the US. And I don't know whether or not that takes into account USL teams, but if they choose not to participate, then MLS still has to expand to a certain number in order to properly put in Pro Rel, which is going to be a lot more new teams coming in. There's gonna have to be overlap at some point. Like it's gonna happen again, and we're gonna have this same conversation again. And I don't really know what you do if you're in Don Garber's situation. If you're in Garber's situation, I guess you just got to do what's best for your league and not really care about upsetting the USL fans. I would imagine that's probably what he's going to do, but it's like, it's a really tough situation to see because you see the comments all the time and it's like, Indy Eleven's done a really good job of building the sport in Indianapolis and building up a following and really it looked like they had plans to invest and continue to grow. And then it's just like all of a sudden the MLS name comes in there and now all of that just gets thrown by the wayside. And I would imagine as an Indy 11 fan, you got to be furious about that. Like that's got to be super frustrating. I think the thing that is a little confusing to me is the the anger in this particular situation towards MLS because I don't, unless I was wrong, I don't think MLS said anything about like, yeah, for sure we're gonna add a team here. Like it seemed to be all the mayor being like, yeah, we're pursuing getting an MLS side. But then I feel like all the hatred's been towards MLS. Like, why are you going into their city and like uprooting Indy 11 when I don't think MLS has said anything about adding a team there?
A great little transition because that's actually my second point. Because there's this idea floating around there, and it like when you talk about stretch, like how you can stretch to make something happen or grasp at straws. Like this is the Bob's Burger memes where Bob is stretching over the counter to get straws, and he turns around and says, "I'm literally grasping at straws." This is what this is, in my opinion. Some people might disagree with me. That's okay, because there's the idea that Garber called up the mayor and was like, "Yo, come fly out to New York. Let's talk about how we can take this project that you're building and kill it, and then give it all to me anyway, so that I can put this team that doesn't have any investors at the moment. We've got some who might be interested. I don't have a team name or a timeline or anything like that, but yeah, just do it for me." And the mayor was like, "Okay, politicians aren't smart, but they're not that dumb. So let's lay out some of the things that have happened over the time that Indy 11 has existed. 11 years ago, it was formed with the owner, Ursal Ozdemir. I believe I'm saying that correctly. I apologize if I'm not. When he did that, he made it very clear. His goal was MLS. He wanted to expand and go into MLS. Over that time, he has built a fantastic reputation for the club, garnering nearly 85% or more average every single year to every single game, making it one of the best attended clubs in USL. In 2017, he applied for MLS expansion, but he was unsuccessful. So he went out and got funding to break ground on a $1.5 billion stadium that would hold 20,000 fans, would also apply 600 apartments, 200,000 feet of office space, 200,000 feet of retail space, a hotel, lots of park space, parking garages, the whole shebang that we see with all these new MLS teams coming in with their new stadiums. All of this would be for the idea that he would get to bring a state-of-the-art stadium, a strong fan base, and a great location to Major League Soccer. And the idea in this grasping for straws narrative is that Don Garber, who everybody says doesn't understand soccer, he's just a businessman, has seen all of that work with the clear intention that this team wants to be a part of his business plan. And he just decided to say, no thanks. I'm going to bypass all of the work you've done, find random potential investors with more money, take over the location by calling the mayor and creating this underground connection to try and undercut you, and then take it all for myself. That's insane, right? Like, am I the only one who thinks that's insane?
I mean, I feel like you should expect that that's kind of be the route that they're going to take here. I mean, we've talked about it before. It's just like any little bit that they can kind of grasp onto to try to make the league look bad, they'll do it. And in some cases, it's definitely justified, like with US Open Cup. But I just don't see it in this case. I just don't. It's like to me, it seems it's like it's all the mayor, basically just other parties that are the ones vying to join the league, and MLS is just kind of like, well, maybe.
Well, and that's where it doesn't make sense to me because if you look at let's assume and by the way, I'm not saying that Don Garber isn't actively looking to go into these markets, right? We've gone through that whole thing. It's quite clear he is. But if his goal is to go in there so he can weaken USL so that they have to merge, which sounds like a more realistic plan to weaken your competition? Find one of their top attended teams with one of the better play styles and future best stadium and welcome them in while they pay you money to do it, or take 10 years of work, throw it into the ground to find random investors who you don't know if they're actually in or not, bring them in, make them formulate a full idea behind a team, an identity, a logo, a fan base, do all the groundwork again that they've been putting down for the last decade just to try and take the chance that they would be more popular than Indy 11, who is already one of the most popular clubs in USLC. I've never taken business 101, but if I did, I bet you if they gave me those two options and I picked the one that people are saying Don Garber is trying to do, I'd fail business 101 because that's just bad business. You are taking a bigger risk by finding new investors to put a brand new team together, lose out on, let's say you're taking 20,000 fans, right? If 8,000 of those fans say no thanks, you're losing almost half of the fan base that you could have had. Why would he take on that sort of risk to the team that has already made it clear that their whole point of what they're doing is to get into your league? Why would he then take the risk to be like, hey, by the way, kill it all and let's start this over again? Like that's just ridiculous to me. Not saying that he hasn't gone in and tried to do that to other teams like San Diego who couldn't find a stadium, right? He clearly saw that as a point where they said, okay, they get 4,000 fans, they're not getting a stadium. We can go in with our money, with our investors and whatever, and we can take over from them. Yes, that's probably what he did, and it's probably not the best look. This is not what's happening in Indianapolis. You can't convince me otherwise. You can probably sit down and convince me other areas he's done that, and you probably have enough for me to agree with you there. Not here. Not I won't have that.
No, I think I'm in the same boat as you. I don't I don't really see it. But there's plenty of anger towards the league. I mean, I've seen it on multiple platforms. People are definitely not happy about it. And I can understand the anger and frustration, but I just don't understand why in this particular case that it's the anger and frustration is pointed towards the league. When I feel like the league in this case didn't do anything and hasn't done anything. I mean, I was reading Felipe Cardenas, his article on the whole situation, and there's a line right towards the end of it that says MLS was not part of the city's decision to abandon the project, according to the aforementioned source. So, I mean, to me, all of the signs have pointed towards MLS has nothing to do with this. They maybe have had conversations with the mayor, but to me, it sounds like the mayor was the one that initiated the conversations, and nothing has come out of it. But yet, I still feel like they're the ones that are taking the PR hit on this case.
Well, and I've got a little bit of notes from Indianapolis Business Journal, who did a lot of reporting on this, and we'll go through them in a second. But this is why it's very difficult to have conversations about stuff like this on an app like Twitter because it's all very, very big anger, but it's always pointing in the wrong direction. And then eventually people come in and are like, hey, maybe you should actually like redirect that. We're not saying don't be upset that your team is under fire, but point it at the right people. Go and especially in a case like this where the person doing it is a publicly elected official who has to hear your complaints, right? Go over and tell him that you don't like what he's doing. Go over and you can be mad at MLS, but that's not going to change anything, right? Oh, or evil MLS, rah, 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 right? What's that done? We've got 20,000 people in every stadium every week. Like your anger is fine, but it's not making as much of a change in MLS as it would be if you went up to your mayor and started writing letters and emails and phone calls to say, "Hey, save my team," and don't do that. So
Yeah.
the like I said, you mentioned it. It's from the city and the developers. It's not MLS. The Indianapolis Business Journal did a lot of reporting on this, and the city was shopping this land on their own to the highest bidder. They didn't reserve it for the Keystone Group or Ozdemir. They stated that the reason they were doing this is that the original agreement between the group and the city and what this plan was going to be involved a significant gap in the tax revenue generated by the site and what would go back to the city versus what would be kept. They also stated that they projected that the group would fail to meet the necessary funding to actually build the stadium in general. So the funding for this financial project was a long shot. So it sounded like this, like I mentioned, they wanted the city to pay more up front than the taxpayers were going to contribute. You know, the where the ownership group would pay for it versus their tax payers, and that was a big sticking point as well. But if you take this all into account, right? If you look at that and you don't think, okay, the mayor has now made a political decision to try and find a better investor for a soccer specific stadium, who's he going to turn to? You're going to go to USL One? You're at USL Championship. If you're going to build a stadium, there's only one person to turn to fill that and use it properly. That's MLS. That being said, I don't think Don Garber sought this out like everybody says he is, because he's made it very clear he is not actively looking to get past 30 teams until at the very earliest 2026, 27, when they're done with the World Cup. He was asked about, or at least MLS's spokesperson was asked about their thoughts on the conversation and how it went. And the only thing that he said is that he was excited that they're building a soccer specific stadium. Never once did he mention that it was going to be a landing spot. Never once did he commit that this was going to be an expansion site. There are many other areas that this league can go to expand and have much less risk at not being successful than one of the best attended leagues or teams in USL Championship. So to think that Garber called the mayor to get all of this done instead of just having a mayor call him up and said, "Hey, I'm interested in expansion. Can we meet?" And he said yes, and then sat down with him for 30 minutes, and then the mayor goes off on his own political stunt to try and show off like, "Oh, look at who I'm meeting with these big people." Like, stretch isn't even the biggest word to describe it. Again, you can throw a dartboard and pretty much figure out, okay, MLS has gone into this area and is trying to take that team out. You could probably find decent footing to have a conversation about it. This is a massive stretch with the information provided. Now, that being said, if it comes out in 3 weeks and Don Garber comes out and is like, "Yeah, I called the mayor and we saw that there was a problem with the funding for the stadium, and they've already got shovels in the ground, and we thought it'd be a good opportunity to continue that building with proper funding and get it up and running with an MLS team." I'll be the first one to put my hand up and say I was wrong and I judged him incorrectly. But with the information that I've got here, you need to do a lot of work other than a conspiracy theory of Don Garber is putting phone calls into the mayor of every city that USL is successful in and trying to ruin them. I don't believe that.
I mean, I'll go back to my point again. If you can find a few cities that you think would be or would have large enough of an interest for MLS to move into that is now already occupied by either another MLS side or USL, I'm all ears for hearing what those expansion opportunities would be. But I'm looking at the map right now and I see very few opportunities. I mean, there's like, even if you wanted to make the argument for like, I can't remember what the other city was. It was like Cleveland and somewhere else in Ohio. But then you're now pushing three teams in Ohio, and I think you're starting to kind of move into cannibalizing your own fan attendance there because now you're just taking that same Ohio population of soccer fans and dividing them across three teams instead of two.
Not
Um,
to mention that you also need to make away fans go to Ohio, which is like
yeah, that is
that's
brutal.
classified as torture in most
Yes.
states.
But I mean, I'm looking at the rest of the map and I genuinely like it is hard. It is very difficult to find large enough cities to move into that there's not already another team there. Like, of course, there's going to be teams in all the large cities across like three different leagues. Like, why would a major city not have a team at this point? Like, of course, there's going to be. I think there's really no choice if you're MLS but to expand into cities or areas that have other teams. And that's just going to have to, like, if you want to expand, that's just going to kind of have to be how it is. And
And
I, based on what they did with San Diego, I don't really think Garber and his group really cares.
sure, and I agree with you to a point where they are definitely looking to, as we mentioned earlier in the segment, right? It's now a race and it's a fight. So they're looking to win the fight, knock out who they can knock out. Indy 11 was basically offering themselves up to say, yeah, we're in USL Championship. We will leave them. You don't even need to kill us. We will just leave and take all of this work that we've done and be part of you. To try and convince me that Garber was trying to ruin all of that, I don't believe it. Did he see an opportunity? Like that's probably the farthest you can bring me back, right? Like he saw that the financing was really poor, and that's probably what the mayor did. The mayor probably came back and was like, "Listen, here are our projections with this USL project that is not going to make it work. What can you do to help us?" And Don Garber either said we can work with, or we can get a new group in, or we can try and work and with the Keystone Group and try and find the extra funding to cut it up. Maybe it was logistically too difficult. Maybe Ozdemir didn't want to share what he was doing. Again, those are the details you don't know. But I don't think that you can push that into a narrative that I would believe right now. Again, when more information comes out, maybe, but not right now. Which is why when it happened, I first tweeted out like, this is a really vague statement, right? This is a mayor coming out and saying, I want to go to MLS, which is basically like me going on to our podcast, but broadcasting it to the world and saying, I want to coach the men's national team. Just because I want it doesn't mean it's going to happen, right?
And there's nothing to say that, or there's nothing that's been said, and there's nothing to say that eventually it's not Indy 11 themselves that is the team that moves to MLS and is the MLS presence in Indianapolis.
Right. And that was the other thing I noticed too. Like he didn't come out and say we are
We
going
want a
to.
team separate from Indy 11.
Right. Now, he didn't also say, I want to bring Indy 11 up, which is where that, disconnect is. But that's what I'm saying is like, you can be mad at MLS all you want. It won't change what's happening. But if you go back to the mayor and start hitting him with all this information saying, we want Indy to exist still, maybe then his thought process changes to say, hey, let me work with Don and his, money pool of investors, whatever, and see if I can make these two guys meet in the middle so we can keep this going and almost like a save the crew moment with a different league. You know, I feel like there's so much more that can be done other than just be like MLS is killing more USL teams again, right? And it's people with a big following that are making those statements, which is really damaging to the finding the truth, right? This is not really directly connected to what's going on here, but it kind of is. So there was a really interesting op-ed piece by James Brigg at the Indy Star. And basically the title was, don't feel bad for Indy 11 that they might die because they're just a minor league team and India, this move that MLS is making is going to give you a major league team and you should be happy about that. I mean, I don't think it's a hot take here that I'm going to go on record and say that is just unfathomably, unconditionally wrong. And that there is a difference between lower level and minor league. Indy 11 is lower level professional, not minor. There are minor league soccer leagues in the United States. It's called MLS Next Pro. They are feeder teams that are directly tied to their parent club. That is what the minor league is. It doesn't exist in USL Championship. It doesn't exist in USL 1. Those are not minor leagues. They are professional leagues. But what I'm very interested in is this brings up a really interesting conversation about how lower leagues are viewed by the average American. You and I both know, we're soccer lovers, know people who watch, play FIFA all the time. Most of them know that lower leagues are professional leagues. They're just different. And they are different from, let's say, the Long Island Ducks. They're different from the Binghamton Rumble Ponies, right? They're not affiliated to anybody except themselves at this point, right? Back when USL had a bunch of Red Bull 2 teams, that's a different story. But right now, They are fully self-sustaining professional leagues. To call them anything just except that is disrespectful. It's showing a lack of knowledge that you are writing about, and it is relatively disappointing because here we are believing as a group that there's this whole ecosystem of Americans who get soccer and love soccer and implement a couple of things, and they're soccer's going to blow up here. But now we're here looking at these beat writers who are out here, mixing up the terms minor and lower league. That is a problem to me, right? And again, it's not really the point of this whole Don Garber versus Indy thing, but I think it's an interesting conversation going back to our European teams playing in America, right? And how a rise in soccer attention doesn't necessarily coincide with a rise of attention at the lower levels, because these casual slash non-soccer fans that are watching the highest, Man City, Man United, Barcelona, Real Madrid, are watching that, and then they're going back and they're seeing MLS as a lower level and anything under that is minor, because that's what's in their mind. They're Americans, but they're not. They've got they're professionals, they're ties to the community, development pathways. They're different from lower leagues, but people don't know that. So the conversation isn't how do we get people to, and it may be another episode we do later on, but it's not how do we get people to care about soccer in general, but how do we get them to understand the nuances and the differences between MLB, between NHL, right? You can bring every top 20 team in the world to play in the United States, but that doesn't mean that they're going to turn around and support a team that's right down the road if they think it's a minor league team versus a lower league team. And that doesn't matter whether they're going up, down in a system that merits that, or they're moving to MLS next. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the general casual soccer fan watches Man United, says, "Oh my God, Marcus Rashford, what a guy," and then turns around and doesn't give the time of day to somebody else because they think it's too low of a level for them to care about. At least that's my opinion from that. I'd like to hear yours, but
Yeah, I think it's a pretty outrageous thing to say, to tell the fans of Indy 11 that they should not be upset about potentially their team having to compete with an MLS team in the area when they've been around since, I believe, 2013. I mean, that's such an insane statement to say. Like, at this point, there's people that have been fans of Indy 11 for 10 plus years, and for them to have to then all of a sudden compete with another team that is going to have infinitely more financial power and is going to command a lot more attention and attendance in the media, in the local media, in the national media, it would be super hard on the club. And to tell the fans then that they should not be upset, like if something were to happen in Indy 11, is just absolutely insane. Like that's somebody's favorite team. Like that's their equivalent to how you see Red Bull, how I see Atlanta. Like to just tell them like, oh, it's fine. You'll have a better club that you can be a fan of in the area. So who cares about what happens to the Indy 11? Like that's like taking the last 10 years that you've spent being an Indy 11 fan and just being like, well, that was just completely irrelevant. I guess all the amazing memories that we've had, all of the history that's you've been able to witness at games or on TV, all of that was just irrelevant, and it's all fine because we're going to get an MLS team. Like one of the reasons that we do the MLS history segment is so that fans can relive some of these like amazing moments that happened so long ago. And I'm sure there's so many Indy 11 fans that have their own versions of that that they can relive. And to just be like, it's fine, you're going to get an MLS team, all of that history and whatever, it doesn't matter. I just think that's such an insane thing to say. That's kind of like that's the first thing that I thought of when I had saw that pop up
but
on
yeah,
the timeline.
when if and when this happens, if the mayor isn't lobbying to bring Indy 11 up and is just saying, "Hey, let's start over," Indy 11's gone. Like they're not going to have a stadium to play in unless they find a way to stadium share, which could still happen. But you're exactly right, right? The idea that just because you don't care about it doesn't mean that nobody else cares about it is a massive problem in American soccer in general, right? I get the conversations all the time, like, "Oh, we need pro rel because every game is more important." Well, last year I watched seven teams fight out for the last three playoff spots. That was exciting to me. Oh, well, it's not that important because pro rel has more on the line. Well, okay, now what you're saying is it's still important to somebody else. It's just not important to you, so you don't care about it, which is fine. But you don't get to tell people who, as you mentioned, have been around for over a decade now that all of their memories and all of their support means nothing just because they're getting something in a higher league, which doesn't matter because that's not what they're attached to. Again, if this team is around for 2 years and they've had 400 fans at every game, sure, maybe. This is a team that constantly is filling they're at the University of Indianapolis, I think might be the where they're playing right now. They constantly fill those stands, right? They have tons of player memories. They've got a decade of memories just to tell them that, oh, you're a minor league, so it doesn't matter. You should be happy you're getting a major league is ridiculous. It's wrong. It's terrible. So completely agree with you there. And again, at the end of the day, will you probably see more fans in the stadium that MLS builds? Maybe. They've got better marketing tools. They've got better connections. But will it be the same as the 8,000 who have been there for a decade, who are all about their team and constantly are finding new ways to support and new chants and things like this? Completely different vibe you're going to feel. And that's the problem where you've got Indy who's ready to bring all of this to you. And now you're saying, oh, I'm just going to undercut them. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it'd be like I know technically these two teams are in different countries, but looking at a map right now, they look very close to each other. If you're a fan of the team Chester in England, I don't know the full name. I apologize. It'd be like telling them like, oh, they're right near Wrexham. Wrexham obviously has had this absolute resurgence in um, their form, and I think they've climbed all the way up to League One right now. They have super marketable, flashy investors and a lot of money. It'd be like telling them, like, if anything were to happen to their club, like, oh, it's fine, it's whatever. You have these new owners right down the street in Wrexham that you can be a fan of. It's like, well, that doesn't replace the like millions of memories that I've created watching this club over the years. And I'm not just gonna like abandon that because there's like some flashy, expensive new thing right down the road. Like that doesn't replace the countless amount of time that I spent and countless memories that I have following this other team.
Right. And again, it may sound a bit harsh here, but that's a relative rarity at the lower leagues because of how new they are and because of how much turnover there is. To have a decade worth of that following, it's so rare that you don't want to get rid of it if you're going to go into that area. You want to bring it along with you, which is what they were working on doing. So, it's something that'll be interesting to keep an eye on because I I have a pretty big feeling that in the next week or two, we're going to see the mayor come out and have either a statement of taking it back, or is going to make a statement saying when I said we're going to look for an MLS team, I meant we're going to bring Indy up and we're going to try and find. He's going to find some way to spin it like, oh, I just misspoke. That's what I think is going to happen. That's what I hope is going to happen, and it's something I'm gonna watch until it does happen. And if it doesn't, then go after the mayor. That I got to rephrase that. Don't go after the mayor. Don't try and hurt him, but lobby him, right? Go tell him that you don't want that to happen. If 8,000 people a game are going up and saying, hey, you're making a bad decision and this isn't going to grow the sports landscape of Indianapolis, but it's actually going to hurt it, show him that, right? Prove that is the case, because I think this specific example has the ability.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Well, only two topics today because they were a little bit more in depth than usual, but we hope you enjoyed them and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you go ahead and follow us wherever you get your podcasts, when we go live. And make sure you're following us on social media. That would be Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok, because we're kind of phasing out Instagram at this point. We don't get too much engagement there anymore. So we'll just phase that out and go with Twitter, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Those are where our most following is, and that's where we are going to focus our content. So go over there and check out our clips. We're posting those pretty frequently these days. But yeah, thanks so much again for listening to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast, and we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.